I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge that we're holding this meeting on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation, Tsleil-Waututh Nation, and Musqueam Nations. We recognize and respect them as nations in this territory, as well as their historic connection to the lands and waters around us since time immemorial. Council at its December 2nd, 2019 closed meeting appointed Petra Cotier and Naslin Sanderji and reappointed Kochi Ronald Shimoda and Cynthia Garton to the Memorial Library Board for terms ending December 31st, 2021. Over to you, Monty.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just the quick overview of safety procedures, which have changed due to construction in Municipal Hall. The north entrance to the building is closed for construction. In the event that we need to evacuate, please use one of the following routes. Proceed down the hallway, take a left. You can go out the main doors west onto 17th Street, down the stairs and through the new atrium and exit onto ground level next to the police department, or immediately behind Councillors Wong and Sopovich, there's an exit out to the parking lot. And as always, we ask the voluminous crowd to keep the aisles and doorways clear and accessible. Thank you.
Thank you. Does council have any urgent business to add to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, I'll get a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved with proposed amendments.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And a motion to adopt the minutes.
Yes, Madam Mayor, recommend that the minutes of the November 25th, 2019 special open session council meeting, the December 2nd, 2019 special open session and regular council meetings, and the December 3rd, 2019 special council meeting and public hearing be adopted as circulated, and two, the summary of the December 3rd, 2019 public hearing be approved.
Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. I'd like to remind the public that if you wish to speak to an agenda item for 3 minutes maximum, please sign the speakers list, speak clearly into the microphone so that everyone can hear comments, including those who depend on assisted listening devices, and provide their name and whether they are a West Vancouver resident. Thank you. And reports. Item number 4, the 2020 to 2024 5-year financial plan context report.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as you just mentioned, I'm here to present the context for the 2020-2024 5-year financial plan, also known as the budget. And my presentation outline is I'll speak to effective financial management here at the district, the topic of asset management, greening the budget, and then factors particularly affecting the 2020 annual financial plan, which is the first year of the 5-year plan, and then the budget process. So in terms of effective financial management, the budget is not just about the tax rate increase, which sometimes is the focus, but it actually provides a cost and risk management framework for the budget's entire operation and management. And it's supported by a suite of financial policies, which we have been working very hard on over the last 5 years, a coordinated system of reserves, an asset management plan, and then finally, all of that comes together to create a priority-based annual budget and 5-year financial plan. So the effective financial management depends on scanning for key issues that can drive costs or limit revenues. The basic finance issues here in the district relate to the fact that there's an undiversified tax base. 97% of the tax rate base in the district is residential. 3% is business, and there is no subsidy from industrial taxes, as there are in many other communities in the Lower Mainland, because there is no industrial tax base. This has resulted in limited cash reserves being available for major projects because the district also does not have a lot of land that it could develop. And there's limited diversification of the revenues and a reliance on taxes and on permit fees. So many other communities in the Lower Mainland have other sources of revenues, the 2 main other sources of revenues being parking and casinos. But neither one of those have gotten much traction here in West Vancouver. So there is an issue in terms of not being able to diversify the revenues very far, and therefore, once again, being heavily reliant on the tax base. In addition to this, there are environmental and climate destabilization issues which are facing the District of West Vancouver, as well as all the other communities actually planet-wide. But of particular concern here in the district is an expectation that the district will be able to protect or enhance the waterfront. And while the district, I'm sure, will do everything it can in order to protect and enhance the waterfront, this is going to be a challenge. And as time goes on, I think it's going to be an even greater challenge. We also have to be concerned with the forest interface. And a community wildfire protection plan has recently been developed, and there's a number of recommendations in there that the district will be faced with implementing. And storm damage. We can expect more frequent and probably more severe storm events, and these can have quite an effect on a community like West Vancouver, especially with the tree canopy, but also, of course, on the foreshore. So these things all interact. We've recently completed a natural capital inventory to help us to understand what natural capital we have here in the district, and one of the things we're going to be working on as we move forward is understanding how to manage and enhance that natural capital. Asset management. There, in the past, there was underinvestment in the maintenance of the existing assets. The district, over a period of time, 5 years, has managed to build up an asset levy, which is actually at the level of $14.5 million. I'll touch on that again a little bit later, but that is the optimal amount for the maintenance of the existing assets. The problem being that there are that would be sufficient to keep the assets at optimal maintenance if they were all already at optimal maintenance, but they're not. There's the issue of deferred maintenance from underinvestment in the past, and that needs to be tackled in order to get the suite of assets up to optimal condition. And the finance have some proposals about how that might happen. Also, West Vancouver may have taken on too many assets, and assets too widely dispersed. It's easier to manage assets that are consolidated in one area, and if things are spread too thin, then asset management becomes a bit more of a challenge. So this is something that's being looked at. But the nature of West Vancouver is such that geographically it's spread out sort of along a long area, and then it's mountainous. This creates challenges with the maintenance of things such as trails and parks, roads, and underground infrastructure. There's also a long list of new and renewal major projects under consideration, including a new arts facility, an emerging vision for the Civic Center area, and thoughts about what might happen along the waterfront, particularly in Ambleside. Each one of these projects could be quite costly. And so council needs to consider what kind of strategy could be put in place for that. And I mentioned before the need to address climate change and natural assets. The public expects a very high level of service in West Vancouver. There is less support for a high level of taxes. But with the tax base, which is 97% residential, these things need to be somehow brought into alignment. And there's very high expectations for consultation and decision participation, which is great because that's the essence of democracy, but that can delay actually having anything happen, and it can become costly if it's not handled very carefully. Real estate is subject to large dollar value changes in the district. This is not something that affects the ability of the district to collect taxes, because taxes are just the value of the real estate is just used as a way to allocate the tax shares. But it does subject the population, I guess, to feelings that, things are fluctuating. It introduces this level of uncertainty into people's lives, which in my conversations with members of the public, it can be quite a concern. So I just raise it here because I think it's a challenge in terms of putting forward the budget, because people don't know quite how to deal with this uncertainty. This year, hopefully, the assessments will be relatively stable. We haven't received the completed roll yet, but we believe that there will not be the large value changes we've seen in the past. And I think that will actually help people to kind of comprehend what's going on. Legal and procedural, we have FOI requests which are increasing in number and complexity. The police alone are receiving phenomenal amounts of FOI requests, and Mr. Panetton, who handles them for this side of the House, can also tell you that there are many complex requests, and we have to devote a large amount of staff resources to actually handling these. We're becoming we're developing protocols for handling them, which is helpful, but at the same time, we can't anticipate what people are going to be asking about, and so, as I say, it does require quite a bit of staff resource to handle this. This is fine. We want to have open data. We certainly have, we want to provide as much information as we possibly can, but it is a challenge. We also have numerous committees, task groups, citizens inquiries. These are all, again, to do with the very high level of involvement that this community has, but they are costly. And supporting the numerous committees requires quite a bit of staff input. And there's many contentious issues resulting in legal costs. The situation in this community is such that almost any issue or any enforcement issue that is in any way complex can result in legal costs for the district. So we're not alone in this. I mean, across the Lower Mainland, legal costs are rising, but I think it is a more acute problem here. We're also facing issues with senior governments. We have a restrictive legislative framework that we have to operate in. It limits the type of investments we can make. It limits the type of revenues we can collect. We have been working very hard to petition the senior level, the provincial government, for instance, to allow West Vancouver to have a vacant home tax similar to what is in Vancouver, and has been very successful there. So far, we have not gotten permission to do that. And we can't do this on our own, because the legislative framework governs everything that we do. If there is no piece of legislation, there's no section of the Community Charter or the Local Government Act that allows us to do something, then basically we're not allowed to do it. And so this makes it difficult and challenging, because we might have many very good ideas about, for instance, how to get new revenues, but we might not be able to implement them. Grant funding is available from the senior levels of government. We do apply for every grant that we can, but the grants are targeted, they're limited, they're restricted. We can only get them if we're given them. So we'd spend a lot of time trying to find out what grant funding is available and how we might be able to access it, but it's a challenge. And as we move into the housing world, which is something that the district is moving towards, there's some very complex funding models out there that are going to have to be considered. And we have increased compliance costs. That particularly relates back to FOI, but there are other kinds of things as well. I mean, we recently received from Statistics Canada a very lengthy survey that everybody all the staff in the district practically are involved in trying to complete this survey, and we've been told that any future infrastructure grants are contingent upon having this survey completed. So we will definitely be completing it, but again, once again, it's not something that we had in our work plan to do. It's just something that we've been handed by the senior government that we have to do. So each of these risk factors might drive up costs. They might limit our ability to manage costs. They might limit our ability to derive additional revenues. And so we have to address them all, because the organization will continue to struggle unless we do. And our key is to work to create flexibility and resilience for the district. And so many of the things that you'll see proposed for this year's budget are for exactly this reason. Financial policies, I'll go over quite quickly because there will be a presentation on policies later in 2020. The district as a whole, this is not just finance, but all of the areas in the district have been very devoting time to making sure that our policies are up to date, that they are current, that they address the issues of today, and that they're not out of date. Because it's very easy to write up policies and kind of put them on the shelf, then they don't help your organization very much. So we've worked on the purchasing and procurement policy, the capital asset management policy, cash management and investment policy, sponsorship, partnership, and naming rights, and just recently, council approved a new donations policy. We're also on our work plan for 2020, establishment and use of reserves, which is something we were going to do in 2019, but we put it off to 2020 because there's some changes in the regulations there. The use of community amenity contributions, which is also known as a public benefits policy, is something that the Finance Committee are working on. And Finance, of course, are working to support that. And then we want to make sure that we update the expense reimbursement policy for council and staff to make sure that it is current. And I mentioned reserves and a system of reserves. We have statutory reserves, which are either mandated by the charter or allowed to be set up under the charter, and spending authority from a statutory reserve. Mandated reserves can only be authorized by a bylaw. That's our DCC and parking in lieu, which we don't use very much, but DCCs we certainly do. And council-created reserves, which are spent authorized by council resolution. So these amounts are not bought into the budget willy-nilly. Every single expenditure out of these reserves is authorized by council. We have asset management reserves. These are statutory reserves, our facility reserves, infrastructure reserve, and equipment reserve. And this is where the asset levy amount that I mentioned of $14.5 million goes. It goes into these reserves, and then it's brought out through council resolution for investment in the assets. We also have an endowment fund, the DCC fund, and a land fund. Land sales proceeds would go into the land fund. And the Water Reserve Fund, Sewer and Drainage Reserve Fund, Public Art Reserve Fund, Affordable Housing Reserve, and an Archives Support Reserve, which was recently created for the support of the district's archives. We also have non-statutory reserves, which are used to set aside funds for specific purposes or to deal with contingencies. Specific purpose reserves that we have are the artificial turf replacement, the field user fees for the teams that play on the artificial turf actually go into the replacement reserves so that when it, about every 10 years, I believe, the turf needs to be replaced and the fees are set such that the funding would be there when it's time to replace the field. We have restricted community amenity contributions, which are given at the time of when development rezonings take place, and they are directed towards specific community amenities, and so those are considered non-statutory reserves. We also have a youth activity fund, which is used specifically to fund activities for youth. And then we have contingency reserves for things that will happen, but not annually, such as elections. Things that are likely to happen, but we don't know when, such as storm damage, snow removal, or employees on extended sick leave. And short-term contingencies, such as the police moving to a new building or uncertainty re-permit revenues. And for these, we establish non-statutory reserves. And there are also other things that might happen, but which we hope don't happen, such as disasters. And for these, we purchase insurance and establish emergency funds. So these are all the different types of reserves we have. They are there to provide that resilience and flexibility that I mentioned earlier, so that we don't end up in a situation where we're faced with an expenditure and we have no source of funds for it. In terms of asset management, this is something the district has been working very hard on. We have an asset management task group, which is composed of all the asset managers in the district. There are, I believe, 16 people in that group. They meet 3 or 4 times a year, but even when they're not meeting, we're in correspondence with each other and taking training. And each of the asset managers is responsible for a portfolio of assets and updating the state and condition of that portfolio of assets which we have all compiled in a spreadsheet. And this is on what we base our numbers, which tell us how much we need to be collecting to invest in the assets. Move this forward. Oh, we don't want that. Get rid of that. So every year we've been coming forward with what we call the asset investment gap, which was the difference between the asset levy that we were collecting and the amount we needed to invest in the assets. I've been said a couple of times, and I've said last year, that if we could get to $14.5 million, we would have enough to maintain the assets at their optimal level. However, unfortunately, that doesn't mean that we have completely filled the gap, because we have the deferred maintenance issue, which I'll show a graph on in a minute, and we have our response to climate change impacts and maintenance of natural capital, which is something that was not included in our previous calculations. So here's the graph. You can see that the $14.5 million, which is represented by the dotted line, is enough for the regular suite of assets. The problems are in 2020 and 2021, where the bar graph line goes well above the $14.5 million. This is the deferred maintenance requirement, which we've calculated to be about $13.8 million. These are all the things that should have been done in past years, but that there wasn't enough money to do. So here they are. They're still here. They're not in any better shape. And no, actually what happens with assets if you don't invest in them is that they get into worse shape. So we're still struggling to meet this deferred maintenance requirement. Now, when I presented the budget last year, there was quite a discussion among council about raising the asset levy to deal with deferred maintenance, because we had identified this problem last year. And I remember saying at the time that you really can't solve this problem by increasing the asset levy. However, I've had a year to think about it. And I think, in fact, you can solve this problem. What I proposed to the Finance Committee and to Council in a workshop earlier was that we look at using funding from the endowment fund, which we would repay by using the asset levy. And that sum of money, I mean, the problem with deferred maintenance is you need a chunk of money to actually get at it. You can't sort of chip away at it because you're chipping over here and other things are falling into deferred maintenance over here. You need to actually kind of attack it head on. But by obtaining this loan from the endowment fund, which could then be repaid with the asset levy, I think we can successfully tackle this deferred maintenance. And even though the deferred maintenance right now stands at $13.8 million, I believe a $5.5 million loan would allow us to kind of get at the heart of the matter, and that there might be other ways to smooth out the other requirements. So this is something that I'm asking council to consider. So we want to eliminate this deferred maintenance deficit and, of course, also incorporate natural capital maintenance and climate action emergency response support projects. Council did declare a climate emergency earlier in 2019. In order to quickly move the community to respond to the climate emergency, we need funding so that we can green our suite of assets, and we can also support programs in the community that will help members of the community also green their assets. And we want to complete the action on the low-use, poor-condition assets. These are the assets that we identified 3 or 4 years ago now as being a target for attention because they were obviously sort of at the bottom of the list of things that were being used. It's proved to be quite challenging to deal with these assets. Here's a list of them. The Nelson Creek or Nelson Canyon Bridge. We're still working to try to come up with a reasonable solution for replacing that structure, which I have spoken to council before about. The structure itself is delaminating, that is, it's kind of dropping chunks of itself into the ravine. So that's not a healthy situation, but it supports a water main and it supports a connection, an important connection in the trails system, so replacing it is challenging. We put $900,000 into this year's capital budget to complete the design of what we believe will be the solution here, and then we will have to hopefully be able to get some deferred maintenance money to tackle the rest of the work that needs to be done. We have managed to divest the district of some of the low-use, poor-condition assets, the White Cliff Park caretaker building, the Irwin Park and Westwood Park neighborhood playgrounds, and unfortunately, the Youth Activity Center, which had to be demolished, and then staff are working on rehousing those services, so we put $250,000 into the budget for that. Some of the other structures we've taken a look at and decided that we should just continue to do very minimal maintenance. So that's why you see NA there in terms of budget provisions. But we are, we're well aware that these structures are still out there and these assets are still out there, and they are at the top of our list of, moving forward. In terms of greening the budget, I'm asking Council to support an additional asset levy of 1.5%, 1% for natural capital and climate response projects. We have a number of those. I think if Council do support this, we will actually be coming up with more projects than we actually have in the budget right now. We need to electrify our fleet, and we need to create infrastructure for that. We need to do what we can to greatly improve the energy performance of municipal buildings. And we need to support efforts in the community to do these same things. To reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also to work with natural capital, particularly on the stormwater side, so that we can make better use of what we have and also ensure that we preserve what we have. We need to understand our tree canopy better, where the tree canopy may have suffered losses, and we need to develop a much more robust set of data about the trees, about the streams, and about the foreshore and what can be done there. The deferred maintenance, the 0.5 part of the levy here is to repay the endowment fund loan that I mentioned, and that would be a $5.5 million loan. It would be about $24 for the average household, $48 for the natural capital and climate response, the 29 average assessed property value being $3.35 million. So these numbers are calculated based on that. We will have a new number for that when we get the completed roll at the end of December. And so these numbers may change. They will change, but they won't change by much, I would think. So in terms of the 2020 budget, which is the budget for next year, we're faced with revenue reductions in permit revenue. We faced some of that when we did the budget revision in 2019. We feel that we need to be very conservative in our permit and investment income predictions for 2020, so they will be reduced from where they've been in the past. The permit revenues, the trend is for them to be rising at this point, but we don't know how far they're going to rise. And in terms of investment income, we have a cash flow management regime where we look at the cash virtually every day. And every dime that we can have invested, we do have invested, and we get a very good rate. Unfortunately, the world interest income situation is such that we cannot expect to get the rates that we got this year in 2020. So we're doing our very level best to squeeze out every nickel, but we have predicted that the income will go down. We also have contract increases. These are union contracts, which are already in place, and they have increases built into them, and so these need to be funded. And utility rate increases, which many of the utilities, interestingly enough, BC Hydro, Fortis, are petitioning the Utilities Commission for fairly substantial increases, once again, in order to green their operations. So here's some figures for the preliminary operating budget, showing the tax increase cost of the various things that are in place, the labor changes which I mentioned. We also have requests for additional items. These are mostly related directly to council's strategic goals and objectives and to being able to carry those things out. Council have received detailed information about this. Detailed information for these numbers will be available to the public when we publish our preliminary budget book, which should be available in mid-January. The revenue reductions I mentioned result in the loss of about 1.31%, and unavoidable cost increases which relate mostly to utilities and things such as maintenance contracts in place for various pieces of software. We have done our very best to find additional revenues, and we have found some. We have some fees. These are mostly from the fees and charges, which council approved in mid-2019. Those increases go into effect in 2020. We have some new fees which we've been able to introduce, and so we're able to assume that we are going to get some additional revenues. We have some cost reductions. We go over absolutely everything and try to find out, if printing costs can be changed, if we don't lease photocopiers, but instead we buy them and we buy fewer of them, if we can reduce costs there, and so on. And then we have our new construction revenue, which is our estimate from what BC Assessment Authority are telling us are new properties coming onto the roll. There's not a great many of those, but there are some, and we treat that as additional revenue. So the result of all of that is a tax rate increase of 4.66. In terms of operational requests, I said we did include some new things, but we didn't include everything that everyone identified as being required. These were all not things that were desirable. These were all things that were critical, and we went over them, and we met with each department, went over their budget line by line, and we also, the directors of the department and myself and Ms. Lemus also met and went over the budget line by line. And we were able to basically convince the directors that some of the things, even though they were critical, they could do without them. So we did not put them into the budget. In terms of the capital budget, we divided, as I said, we've quantified the deferred maintenance and then our maintenance requirement, which is just related to 2020 for optimal maintenance. We have a few things that are identified as new assets that we should probably look at funding. The biggest one there, I think, is actually to work on railway crossings. There's a major safety issue there, and there is 50% funding available from the railroads. So there's quite a strong case to be made that even though those are new assets, we should look at funding them. And then supporting the community energy and emission plan, and the natural capital assets. And if we can get more funding for that, we can certainly use it. If we are able to get the natural capital levy supported and the deferred maintenance loan supported, then we will be able to fund what we believe is the required maintenance. I see that there's a small shortfall there, but we do have projects which were funded from the various asset levy funds, which will come in under budget. And those funds would be returned to the asset levy fund, so we will have a small amount of additional funds to draw on, and that, I believe, we can eliminate that $249,000 shortfall there. So a 1% property tax rate increase this year raises about $738,000. And we've shown an impact on 3 typical properties of a 1% property tax rate increase. This is the overall impact on the average property, which we identified earlier. And the increase for the operational levy is 4.66. For the incremental asset levy, it's 1.5. So if you add those two together, it's 6.16. And that's what would normally be reported in the press as the tax rate increase. We've also shown the impact, combined it here with the utility rate increases, which council they'll consider finally tonight, but basically gave approval to 2 weeks ago. And because of the way the math works, the total overall impact is only 6.11. That's slightly lower, and it's mostly due to the fact that solid waste is reduced. So in terms of the budget process, we're going to go online with a West Vancouverite. There's a new option there for a moderated forum so that people can ask questions and have answers provided online. This is something new that we're trying. I think it might be a very good way to communicate with the public. We'll see. We're thinking we may do a short video. We're hoping to be able to do one. Video, again, is a bit of a new tool, but I think, the option to explain some of these factors on the 2020 budget and the deferred maintenance and the need to support natural capital and SEEP, we can probably put together a short and hopefully fairly snappy little video that people might want to watch. And then we have our budget information meetings, which in the past have been pretty popular. They will be in the last week of January. We have 3, one during the day at the Seniors Activity Center, then 2 in the evening, one at West Vancouver Memorial Library, and one at the Community Center. And at these meetings, we will present a presentation similar to this, although we're getting feedback from council and we're getting more information, and we're continuing to work on reducing the tax rate increase if we can. So it may be slightly different from this. I don't think it would be very, very different. And we'll get the feedback and take the questions from the public, and we do take notes, and we post the questions and answers online so that everyone can have those. And this is the point where we're at. We're at December 16th, right in the middle of the page here, budget context presentation to council. The online forum will be opening up in early January. We'll have the community budget information meetings. We'll be coming back to council before then with a proposed tax rate increase, and then hopefully once we've obtained council's agreement on what a proposed tax rate increase can be, we'll be able to prepare the financial plan bylaw and bring you that by the beginning of April. We have a statutory deadline that we have to meet. The financial plan bylaw has to be done by the 15th of May. So April 6th seems like it's a long time before the 15th of May, but we have, because of spring break and Easter, there's quite a break in there. So we're feeling that April 6th is as late as we could possibly do this. So that's it, Your Worship.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Gordon. So we have a few councillors with questions. Councillor Soprovich.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Gordon, out of the total budget, we're looking at roughly 87% goes in salaries and wages. It doesn't leave a lot of money to do our work in this community. And yet we see the need for attention dollar-wise to be paid to climate change, the Environment Fund, and natural asset levies, which you have worked on very well and explained things very, very well. My first question to you is, with the district's ability and council's approval to authorization of shifting monies from one reserve to the other, to follow the listings here of where you can find and manage our way through the capital and operating, do you see us in a position where we're going to be in big trouble down the road?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Soprovich, I don't want to give the impression that the district is in dire financial shape. The district is not in dire financial shape. The district is actually ahead of many other communities in terms of facing reality, in terms of infrastructure, and in terms of managing natural capital, and in terms of putting its mind, I think, to the kinds of challenges that all communities are going to be facing. I think the district is actually in very good financial shape. There's not enough money to do everything that everybody would like to have done. There's nothing unusual about that. That's true of practically every community everywhere. I think that the district does need to turn its mind to how it intends to bring about some of these major aspirations that the community has. However, that's not to say that the basic infrastructure is actually now in reasonably good shape, and it's reasonably well funded. What I'm trying to do is make sure that it's in excellent shape and there's no problem with the funding. And in terms of the operational budget, the district, as I said, the community expects a high level of service, and the community actually does get a very high level of service. And everyone who works here is focused on the same goal, excuse me, which is to provide that excellent level of service. So I think that the district is in very good financial shape, but it needs to keep focused, keep its eyes on the prize, so to speak, and make sure that things stay that way.
Well, I've gotten an earful this week, and not too many people are accepting 6.11 increase in taxation, I assure you. And but my point is that the burden is going to be forevermore on the taxpayer, with no industry to help out, very little business. And when you look at it from that point, just in the budget now, there's an ever-increasing demand put on, or a growth put on salaries and benefits. There's a contract issue there of 3-point-something. There's 8 FTEs that we close to 900,000. These are things that add to the top end, and the burden on the taxpayer gets longer and longer. It's a never-ending story. And you have outlined issues here that we can move monies around legally. We have all these different reserves that are going to look after certainly asset management, and the new ones are climate change and the environment fund. However that will turn out, that's going to have a major cost associated to it. I don't get a real complete picture that we truly are, with the amount of money that we have left after salaries and benefits, that we're ever going to have enough money to run this community properly, in spite of the good work that you're doing.
I'll make my comments at the end. Councillor Wong.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is Ms. Gordon. I was wondering if you could sort of play out this scenario. So, given the presentation about decreasing revenues and increasing costs coming up from both sides, pressing up against us, it feels a bit like we're going to be at some point between a rock and a hard place. Correct? Is that a good way to put it?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Wong, if I gave that impression, that was inadvertent. When I said that the district was over-reliant on permit revenues, there was a period of time in the recent past when permit revenues were skyrocketing. And unfortunately, they became a little bit too heavily relied on, I believe. I think that the district is far better off to budget for a reasonable amount of permit revenues, and then if that amount is exceeded, then in the budget revision to reallocate those. So I'm just trying to bring the permit revenues back down to what I think is a sustainable level, so that the district doesn't get caught between a rock and a hard place, so to speak. Investment revenues is similar. There's a base level of investment revenues that it is perfectly okay to build into the budget, and interest rates at this point are so low that we're pretty much at that base level in this current budget. If in time we are able to obtain better rates, then once again, we are hoping to obtain better rates, but that really depends on a number of factors which are outside our control. But we would be coming back to council with the budget revision to say, happily, we've been able to generate some extra funds, and now is the time to fund some of those extra projects that council have indicated are strategic for them. So that is our strategy here, is to kind of get the budget numbers, particularly the investment and the permit revenues, to a sustainable level, which means a level that may be slightly lower than it's been in the past.
Sure. And so given that our infrastructure, we're funding the critical ones, right? And so that it's sort of almost like a never-ending cycle of what becomes critical, because, you know, as things get older, they break down. And then on the flip side, you know, we've got folks who are, an increasing number of folks who are 65 plus, so likely on a fixed income. So limited in terms of how much we can tax, because they've only got so much in the pot, as it were, right? And so how do we, do you have any sort of proposals for how do we move forward and sort of reconcile those two different solitudes, given that, you know, there are perhaps more things that council is now wishing to do, like Councillor Sopperfitch said, you know, climate change, whatnot, in addition to all the regular stuff, keeping lights on, fixing roads, fixing sewers, things that just have been perhaps neglected for a while.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Wong, it's a challenge. This is the challenge that we're facing. This is the challenge every community is facing. Things are changing out there. Some of them are changing rather rapidly. And we need to be ready to meet that challenge. You mentioned business as usual, and in a sense, of course, there's a basic level of services that we're trying to preserve, but we are going to have to consider doing things differently. And this is part of what I mean when I say we're going to be greening the budget, because we will have to consider doing things differently, and things that maybe we've done in the past, we won't necessarily have to be doing the same way. Some of these things, I mean, it's rather interesting. It's a little bit difficult to predict because, for instance, if, and we cannot do this yet, but we're sort of trying to go in this direction, if we were able to have a totally electric municipal fleet, the fuel cost for that fleet would be far less expensive than the gasoline costs we're paying now. So, I mean, there are some pluses and some minuses. And, you know, as we move forward, we'll try to go towards the pluses. And it would not surprise me to find out that 10 years from now, the district budget looked substantially different than it does right now. Another thing that has quite an effect here is technology. I didn't mention that in my presentation, but we are, one of the areas where the district fell behind a bit was in terms of technology investment. And we're trying to change that. And in some cases, there will be substantial savings that result from that, and substantially better service for the public. You mentioned people on fixed incomes, and believe me, I'm very, very sympathetic to that. I'm in that age group myself, and I understand how challenging it can be. But the district is trying to maintain a very complex suite of assets and meet a very complex set of needs. That's expected from all communities. And we do our best to make sure that we're doing that as efficiently and effectively as possible. But there are cost increases that are incurred for that.
Sure.
We try to keep them at a minimum.
Sure, thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you for your report. And I was happy to hear about your answer around greening our assets and have some clarity around that. I think the one thing I'd be concerned about there, you know, I meet with people who are talking about building green buildings entirely electrified and greening a fleet. And I have to wonder if, you know, if we have that capacity in our grid, to what point and how quickly can we actually start changing everything from gas to electric? It seems to be, you know, a very exciting topic. So I'm sure our staff are on top of that. With this new asset levy of 1% going towards climate action, can you describe some of the programs and actions that would be applied to?
one of the things that we're hoping to apply it to is a study of exactly what changes we need to make to our infrastructure in order to green the fleet. Because it's not just enough to have an electric vehicle, you also have to be able to maintain and fuel or charge the electric vehicle. And, you know, what kind of grid would we actually need to do that? So that's certainly one of the things that we'd be looking at, because that's a key to getting that green fleet going, so to speak. If you'll just indulge me for a minute, I'm going to flip over to our, what have I got here? Looking for-
If I might, there are other opportunities in terms of our
Here we go.
facilities and greening our facilities. So as we're doing the upgrades to this facility here, rather than replacing with the current technology, we would be looking at a more climate or more efficient technology, which is a little more expensive, clearly, but would be, has significant G savings and things like that. Same with the HVACs as we move through our facilities.
Here we go.
A lot of those pieces could be funded out of the environmental funds.
Okay, and that would, carry on.
Sorry, if I might, some of the other things we've identified is the structural protection unit, which is a piece of equipment that was requested for the community wildfire protection plan.
Great, yeah.
I think it's a piece of fire equipment. Wildland personal protective equipment. The implementation of shoreline protection projects. The Glen Eagles parking lot resurfacing, there's a geothermal field underneath Glen Eagles parking lot, so it has to be resurfaced with a special type of permeable pavement. So that is, parking lot paving doesn't sound like a green project, but that particular one actually is. We want to buy some more data from the Metro Vancouver Regional District Orthophoto Project. That's to do with understanding the tree canopy. The EV charging infrastructure study, which I mentioned, some cycling and pedestrian infrastructure, and supporting the conversion of the street lights to LED lights, which uses far less power.
Okay.
Because it's not just about displacing gasoline and so on with electricity, but it's also about using electricity efficiently, because if everything's going to be run on electricity, we have to make sure that we're using the electricity as efficiently as we possibly can.
Yeah. Well, excuse my lack of knowledge around this, but when we implement electrical purposes, do we do it just locally, which feeds into a regional system, or does it go directly into the Greater Vancouver system? When we
Are
talk
you-
about our grids, do we have
Like
one?
our local electrical grid,
Mhm.
to be honest with you, I'm not very familiar with exactly how the electric grid works. We'd need someone from BC Hydro here to speak to us about that. But
Okay.
my understanding is that actually the entire North American grid is connected in some fashion. So, but I believe that British Columbia sells quite a lot of power outside the province. So I think we are fortunate here to be rich in electrical production, which doesn't mean that we can afford to waste electricity.
Okay. Just a couple more questions, please. If we were to accept the 6.1% increase this year, do you have any sense of what it would be next year? I don't know if I missed that. Or the direction we're going in?
I haven't looked at next year in any great detail. But my hope is that the asset levy would then be sufficient. We would have dealt with the deferred maintenance problem, we would have something in place for the greening issue, and the asset levy would basically be sufficient, which is something that I don't really think too many other communities can actually say. In terms of operations, everything depends on what contracts are negotiated, quite honestly. And that is something that the District of West Vancouver has limited power over, if you will. Because we're in a region, because we're in a competition with all the other municipalities, because particularly in the public safety area contracts are pretty much regionally set. So this is the struggle for municipalities, because more than 60% of our taxes actually go to public safety, and almost all of that is for wages. So, so this is a challenge. It's a huge challenge. But I think that if council support the increase this year, I have no reason to believe that next year would be anything like this high. I think that across the Lower Mainland, communities are going to try to make this change. They're going to try to green their budgets. They're going to try to move forward, and that this is, in fact, a year to do that.
Thanks. Now, a couple weeks ago, we voted to front-end our utility increases. If we didn't do that, if we just evened it out for the 5 years, what sort of difference would that make to the current tax rate?
So I'm sorry, I don't quite understand. Like if you did not do the smoothing that's already been done for the utilities?
Yes.
It wouldn't make any difference to the tax rate increase per se. It would lower the overall impact. But the reason council did that was because of concern about, I mean, we were asking about future years. We know that regional district costs are going to be substantially higher in future. When the full costs for the waste management plant are realized, and when other regional costs come on stream. So I think that the smoothing that, and other communities actually have been doing this smoothing, and West Vancouver is now doing it as well. And I think that that's to avoid the shock that would happen if it wasn't done.
Well, just finally, I want to say I really applaud the direction you've taken here to try and, we knew this would be a tough year, and I think you're moving in the right direction. The only question I have outstanding is with the using of the endowment funds, and if we had an opportunity to find those funds elsewhere, would you recommend that over the endowment funds through, say, a sale of property or?
I don't think it's inappropriate to use the endowment fund. The projections that we've done show that this is actually a good investment for that fund. That the return to the fund will be higher than can actually be obtained. And we're prepared to pay a slightly higher rate than we could actually get by investing these funds. So over time, the fund will actually be better off. Also, I think it's useful for the district to look to its own resources, which it can manage a little better. External borrowing is always a possibility, but it would, even if council were willing to entertain external borrowing, you couldn't have any funds in hand before next fall. We're too late for the MFA spring issue at this point, because it's about a 6-month process. And external borrowing always puts the borrower at the mercy of whatever the external borrower sets the rate at. So I think it's better to use your own funds if they're available. You mentioned land sales. Excuse me. That's really a political decision that council has to make. And there are a lot of different opinions about what land should be used for, what's the strategic use of land, and what's the strategic use of any funds that are realized from land. So that's something I couldn't really comment on.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gordon.
Councillor Wong.
Just one more follow-up question. So based on your description of our current finances, so we're able to do what we're able to do, plus a little bit. So what sort of options would council have if we wanted to do other things and more things? You know, obviously, like you said, the list could be endless, of course, right? Because if we have $1 billion, then we could, you know, do quite a bit. But, you know, realistically, what other sources of revenues are possibly open to us to perhaps do some of those things that we might like to do that aren't currently scheduled?
Before Isabel answers, if I might, Madam Mayor, I think what council and the community are seeing is that for years, many years, we didn't have our asset inventory. We didn't have a complete asset condition or a 20-year plan in place to look after it. So for many, many years, the property tax rate increases were extremely low and/or at 0%. And so the budget that is in front of council and the community now is actually a budget that is encompassing all of our obligations to look after what we have. If council were to, say, choose to do something over and above what we're currently doing, our resources are limited. Council could also choose to decommission assets, certain assets if they chose, but I think that staff have brought forward a very robust list of assets, some high use, poor condition, low use, low condition, things like that, for council's consideration. And I think that ultimately this budget takes care of our obligations currently. And I'll let Isabel talk to where there may be other funds if you were wanting to do something over and above. We're just looking after a legacy of not looking after
Of course.
what we had. So I think it is a big catch-up, there's no question, on top of climate action and some of the environmental
Yep,
pieces.
yep.
So, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Wong, all I can speak to really is what other communities around the Lower Mainland have as other sources of revenue. As I said, actually, in the beginning of my presentation, we're quite limited. You know, there's many creative ideas out there which are simply not, they're what is called ultra-virus. They're outside of the power of the municipality to implement. But what has been done in other communities are, there's basically 4 things that I can mention, and I mentioned 2 of them earlier. There's pay parking. Pay parking is a major revenue stream for many Lower Mainland municipalities. None of these things I'm going to mention may be acceptable in West Vancouver. West Vancouver is a unique community, and these things may not be appropriate. But pay parking is one. The second one is casinos. If anyone is interested, you can go on the website for the Attorney General, put in the word casino, and you will get a report which is published annually about the amounts of money that come to communities which house casinos from those casinos. And they are substantial. And New Westminster, Richmond, Burnaby, City of Vancouver are receiving substantial revenues from casinos. And they're using them for all sorts of things, which they do. The third thing I'm going to mention is land sales. There are communities, such as Surrey, which have extensive land holdings and are able to develop those and receive revenue from them. And then they're able to use those to create various kinds of amenities. And the other thing that many communities do, and which may or may not be appropriate for West Vancouver, is what is called encroachment agreements. So in any case where a private citizen wishes to use municipal land or a municipal water lot, for instance, they are actually paying an encroachment agreement fee to do that. And there's an agreement in place between the municipality and the private citizen as to what that encroachment agreement will cost and what will be allowed under it. This isn't something that's been done in West Vancouver, but it's something that might be able to be done. But there's nothing simple about any of these things. They're all very complex. And, staff would be very happy to work on any of these if council directed us to do so. Actually, for instance, on pay parking, quite a bit of work has been done. And council have looked at that several times. There have been many studies over the years, and each time, it's not found to be something that council wishes to move forward with. So I don't think there's any easy answer here. And if anyone has an easy answer, I'd love to hear it. But there are some opportunities there that could be pursued, and I know that the Finance Committee, we're looking at this and probably will be discussing it further. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Soprovich.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Gordon, you did outline sort of a sense of priorities for the next 5 years, which is good. One of the things that concerns me is in the listing that you had for deferred maintenance, that will be diminished by funds from the asset levy over time, will it not? I'm assuming that's how it goes. And then there'll be a requirement to fulfill the asset levy back up again, as you relayed to 2021, where the spike is higher. And you also said at some point in time there'll be catch-up. So at this point in time, to use the endowment fund, is it not just putting a finger in the dike?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Soprovich, I don't believe so. What I think is likely to happen is that if we can get support for this fund, endowment fund loan, we will be able to tackle the most difficult deferred maintenance challenges. And that some of the other deferred maintenance, we will be able to deal with it sort of in due course, because we will continue, of course, to do the asset maintenance investment that we need. One of the things that's happening here is that, for instance, if you have a piece of equipment that is badly deteriorated, you may just replace that rather than try to keep maintaining it, a pump or something of the sort. You might just replace it with a new pump, and the new pump, because of technology, might be much better than the old one. So I think that this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to use new methods and new techniques so that what we end up with is something that works not just better, but a whole lot better. And that way, we're going to get rid of this deferred maintenance issue and have the funding in place we need to actually stay at this better state and move forward. And that is what we are trying to do. I am a firm believer in green technology, and that, in fact, it does produce a better outcome. And once again, I'm hoping that we can move the district suite of assets to that better outcome.
Okay. The next point, Madam Mayor, I'll just be quick. I have an opinion that there are certain departments right now that should be funded more than what they are for future needs. And yet, we find that difficult to do that. And I'm just wondering, in all your sense of priorities, whether you think it would be a good idea to do a hiring freeze in West Vancouver?
Your Worship, and maybe Ms. Liemhaus wants to speak to this as well, but we are doing a complete review of the FTEs, and we will be reporting, it's basically a core services review. And we will be reporting to council on that. Whether a hiring freeze is something that the district wants to entertain, a hiring freeze is what I might call a rather blunt tool. I think we want to try to do something that is more targeted and more, maybe a little bit more, well, I'll leave it, more targeted than that. And
yeah, and the only thing I'll add is that I think there are 4 of the FTEs that are in this budget that we're asking to move to FTE because historically they've been funded out of either casual or contract. So it's actually not any additional funds, but the demands are becoming greater and greater. And as council is aware, every year we tend to get additional trails, additional parkland that requires more and more maintenance, and especially given the amount of use that our parks and trails get. And we are falling further and further behind. So I think in terms of a hiring freeze, in this organization for the last 6 years, there isn't one replacement when employees have retired or moved on to other communities of work that they don't go through a very robust review by the supervisor, by HR, by payroll, pardon me, and then by myself. So ultimately, we're always asking the question, does this position need to be filled? Is there another way to fill it? Is there a way to actually look at the work itself, and can it be done in a different way? Anyway, I would, so hiring freeze, to Isabel's a point, it is a bit of a blunt tool, and not all of the FTEs are actual increases in bodies.
Well, certainly, I see from a consideration that we are a community that is long. It is a mountain to sea, which brings in many, many issues. But in regard to the workforce, it has increased substantially over the last few years, and the population has not. And what is it that has brought this great demand of constant renewal or constant moving forward for the demand on monies which we cannot afford?
So, Madam Mayor, if I might, so the number of actual FTEs has not increased dramatically over years. What we have done is actually managed to record them appropriately. So in years, even before my time, if an FTE or if it was funded out of the capital program, it wasn't recorded. So ultimately, I would suggest that we have now got a complete picture of our FTEs. I would also say that in many cases, our FTE growth is related to programs that generate revenue. So we wouldn't be hiring a swim instructor if we didn't have a full class. And so that gets counted as an FTE. So, I mean, I think in many cases in the 5-year financial plan booklet, you'll be able to see which are actual increases in the FTEs, which ones have offsetting revenues attached to them, i.e. they wouldn't be employed if they weren't revenue-generating programs. And I think, too, we've also had some increases. WorkSafe BC, in terms of how our employees work out on the roads and different things, there are increasing demands from that, which from the outside, the optics can be quite frustrating. However, they are regulatory and ensure that our employees are safe. I mean, I could talk for a long time about how come our employee base seems to be quite large. We are a service organization. That's what we do. Whether it's fire, police, engineering, roads, planning, it's providing a service to this community that can't be done in any other way. It's also what makes this community as attractive to the residents as it is. So I think that the concerns that you may have around FTEs are not all as founded as they may appear.
Oh, and finally, Madam Mayor, you have been working, I think had more communication with MLAs in relationship to empty homes and to other things that, as Ms. Gordon has stated, the provincial funding is very limited, and yet the housing issue and climate change issues and foreshore issues of sea level rise are going to put an undue burden on the taxpayers of this community unless we get help. And I know that you made a little bit of headway, but I'll leave it at that. Until we start getting a major push financially from feds and the province, we're always going to be under the gun in spite of the good work that's being done by Ms. Gordon and the staff. In my conversation tonight, critiquing everybody, it is not my critiquing of the professionalism that we have in this community and the hardworking staff. They are second to none. So leaving you with that, maybe you can comment on that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. We've been advocating for a while, but when I attended the session with Carol James, Minister of Finance, in October, she had a roundtable just to get input from all the municipalities that were affected by the speculation and vacancy tax. And as a municipality that contributed over 10% of the revenues to to the provincial coffers of coming from vacant homes. Ms. James was quite assuring that she would be open to giving us the power, like Vancouver, to levy a vacancy tax. And in Vancouver, they've collected around $40 million. So this is a really significant step if we can get this revenue. And we've followed up with a letter, and she assured me that she thought this would be something that we can do. So we're going to continue to remind them of that, and that would be one of these sources of revenues that I think the community, from what I've seen, is actually quite supportive of, because empty homes really don't contribute to our community in any meaningful way, except for property taxes, which we know are basically just cost recovery for services that we're providing. So there's not really a lot of there's no extra revenue that comes out of that. I just want to see no other speakers, just want to highlight a few things so that the community is, I think, can put this budget discussion into perspective. First of all, the fact that 87% or 85% of our budget goes to wages is not at all surprising. When I was with the school district, no one really raised it because they understood very simply that the school district's in the business of hiring teachers and providing an education to kids. We didn't produce widgets. We didn't produce a product. And the district of West Vancouver is very similar. We are a service organization, as Ms. Lima said. So this counter narrative or negative connotation that because such a large percent of our budget goes to wages, that somehow inefficient is, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And using the school district as a really good example of why that's the way it is. And you don't want to be collecting money for a savings account. You're collecting money to pay for these services. So that's one thing. Second thing, if you look at the impact to the average household of all of the levies and taxes, including water, sanitary, and solid waste, you're really looking at about $20 a day for everything that is provided by the municipality. Parks and fire and police and all of the services we do, $20 a day is, I ask everyone to consider the value proposition of that, because I think that's pretty good value for the quality of life that our community enjoys. And I think that really is the business that we're in, is to provide a high quality of life for our residents. I feel quite happy now that our finances are in order. This wasn't always the case when we were initially voting 0% tax increases back in 2012 and 13. When I was new on council, I supported those tax increases, and really they were completely arbitrary, but I was learning the job. And the fact that what that ended up doing was, because there was no acknowledgement that costs continue to go up, wages continue to go up, utility costs continue to go up, and you're operating. If you limited your budget to 0% tax increases, by definition, you would be taking money away from capital, and that's why our washrooms on our beachfront and in our parks were really disgraceful. So we got lots of complaints about it. Now we've upgraded, I think, 2 out of the 3 along the town center, and the last one is due to be upgraded shortly, the one at the concession stand. But I mean, really, for a community like ours to not be able to maintain their public washrooms, I think that is a symbol of what kind of implications there are for that kind of lack of financial management. So we do have the Achilles heel of no industry, and that was a choice of our community, and it's been great. We have a very clean community. We don't have industry, but it comes at a very high cost to our residential tax base. So it is always a balance, but between what we need and what we can afford. And that's, we aren't a bank account, we aren't a bank, we don't put money and save it. We always are trying to balance just taking in enough from our residents, our taxpayers that they can afford, and spending it judiciously. So I completely agree with Ms. Gordon in that our municipality, compared to many others that don't have the resources, that don't have the professional expertise, we're in a good position given the choices we've made. So I would never, as I say every year, want to leave any impression that we're between a rock and a hard place. Well, we used to be between a rock and a hard place because we were stuck and we weren't doing anything to help our situation. And now we've got a plan, we're doing that, and we're being actually very proactive, especially around this deferred maintenance idea. So, and then the other issue is around the endowment, funding the deferred maintenance. If you were given the choice of taking that money out of an account and putting it to use, we're using our money, we're putting it to work, or selling an appreciating asset, I would never choose to sell that appreciating asset. I think it would be the last thing I'd do if I have cash in an account. I mean, it's like borrowing from your own RRSP. People do that, and then they pay back their RSP. So you're putting your money to work, you're earning income on that, and so I think that is actually a prudent approach, which I do support. We will continue over the next 2 months. Council is discussing ways of bringing that 6.16% tax increase down, and I am supportive of that. There's been some recommendations by Councillor Cameron, and we're looking at that. And, you know, it's a question of maybe there is kind of finding the compromise there, and anyway, maybe not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, finding the compromise on some of the things that we do know we need to do. So Councillor Cameron had some very good suggestions, and I encourage everybody on council to take a look at those. And thank you very much for the comprehensive, very accessible presentations, Ms. Gordon, and all your work, and of staff, because this is very simplified. I know what we're seeing, but a lot went into this. And I especially appreciate the prioritization of critical, important, and the third category, which
Desirable.
is desirable, what we want, that's right. Because that's really how we manage our own finances too. We all want a lot of things, but what can we afford? And that's how we're running the municipality. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Thompson, did you want to?
Thank you. Yes, just one more comment, please. I agree with the mayor at how grateful I am for this, how well this budget was presented and rolled out. The only thing I want to caution council about is the argument. It's been a great debate tonight and other nights, but when we start to carve out small aspects of the budget and put a seemingly small dollar figure to it, it unnerves me, because $20 a day is over $7,000 annually, and that's just one aspect. We've heard people carve out $5 a day, and only this, only that. And I think at the end of the day, we want to be looking at the bottom line, because these are pretty big tax increases, and I just want to be really clear with our community about the bottom line. So, thank you.
Thanks. I just think that people can visualize how much they spend on a coffee and putting it in perspective. I don't disagree. That's how I got the number. I took 7,200 and divided by 365. I don't disagree, but it's visualizing what that value is, because percentages don't say a lot, and some of the numbers, like we're adding $400 to the tax bill, maybe doesn't mean a lot when you don't know the base. So it's just a way of thinking about it. It's just a way of visualizing it, but it's absolutely accurate, and it actually took into account all of the costs that are embodied. So it's a realistic number. All right, so I will get a motion then, Councillor Thompson.
Yes, I'd like to recommend the presentation regarding the 2020-2024 five-year plan, financial plan context report be received for information.
Okay, no more discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Moving to item number 6. Item 5's been withdrawn.
And Madam Mayor, sorry, just for the benefit of the people watching this, both in person and at home, staff will be putting this presentation that Ms. Gordon just provided on the website tomorrow morning on the agendas page, so everyone can see it.
Excellent. Thank you. So item number 6, Councillor Soprovich.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll move that proposed noise control law, control bylaw number 4404, 2005, amendment bylaw number 5042, 2019 be adopted.
Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And I'll also move that the proposed development procedure bylaw number 4940, 2017, amendment bylaw number 5043, 2019 be adopted.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item number 7 is the proposed solid waste utility bylaw. Councillor Wong, as written. Seconder? Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item number 8.
Moved as written.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item number 9. Councillor Thompson. I guess.
Yes, so moved.
All in,
Oh.
oh, you have a question on item number 9, the sewer and drainage utility?
Maybe Ms. Lemus can help. So based on the, there's an asset levy generally for sewer. There is, we do save a tremendous amount of water costs from GBRD with our own Eagle Lake, and, you know, over time, that's going to pay in spades. So in the delivery of the messaging we got from engineering and these costs, they still seem to be going up at a rate that is a little bit staggering, Ms. Lemus. I don't know how, in fact, the water one I'm okay with, because I know that we're seeing a difference there. But, and we're also seeing a great difference in the solid waste collectibles. But we don't get a fair picture right now because of the operation of the plant that's being worked on now as to what we will face, the taxpayers will face on that number alone. And I didn't hear it come up too much in conversation. So it's anticipated then in future years we're going to be looking at a sizable increase per household.
I actually think we spoke about it in the presentation, but the final numbers from Metro have not been completed.
Okay.
Ultimately, in the new year, I would like to suggest, as it relates to the wastewater treatment plant, that we hold an information session for the community to bring them up to speed on that. It's been a fairly complicated and lengthy process, and at that point, we will definitely have all of the numbers.
Thank you.
Excellent.
That's all I
Question
wanted.
or idea. Thank you. All right, so I think we had a mover and a seconder on that.
Yes, Madam Mayor, the motion's on the floor.
So I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Consent agenda. Councillor Soprovich.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'll move that the consent agenda items as follows be approved. Item 11.1 regarding 2019 third quarter financial report. Item 11.2 regarding delegation requests. Item 11.3 regarding appointment of acting mayors for 2020. And item 11.4 regarding correspondence list.
Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to reports from mayor and councillors. Any reports?
Just quickly, Madam Mayor, ACDI, we had a Christmas get-together, and what resolved from that was a very sort of close picture of these wonderful people that have an ability to get around in life. Sitting with them in a dinner format, you really get a really close view of their personalities, and the ones that are on the committee are a great group of men and women who, for the most part, have challenges every day that we don't in a lot of cases, and I did one thing in the summer when we were walking in their shoes, and that was to put a blindfold on and go across Lonsdale with the cane, led by another blind person. And I'll tell you, the experience left you kind of, wow, they face that every day. So that was very encouraging. And I must tell you, on Saturday night, Operation Red Nose finished about 4 in the morning, and we had the biggest number of calls in about the last 10 years. So people are really getting smart, and this service provides to get their car and home safely and themselves. Wonderful service by the Rotary, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wong.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had the opportunity of attending a ceremony put on by Squamish Nation, as did you, with the West Vancouver Police, whereby we put their canoe to sleep, which is part of the tradition. So at the end of the season, the canoes are put to sleep, and then in the new year, they're reawakened for the season. So it was a pleasure to attend, of course, to represent council. But what made this event really, really notable was that there were 400 students from Simon Fraser University's Bachelor of Education program, future teachers, there to witness the event alongside with us, learning about what it meant for reconciliation with our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, what it meant for these symbols and ceremonies in the broader community context. So it was great to see the progression of that what was once just a small canoe become such an incredible symbol and a piece of way to connect our communities together.
Well said. Thank you. I have 2 reports, or reporting on 2 items that I attended last week. I think they were both on Thursday. The TransLink meeting I attended in the morning. Councillor Cameron was unavailable, so as my designate, so I attended, and it was really about ride-hailing, which we know that the Passenger Transportation Board has announced a regulatory framework for ride-hailing service. And so the main discussion at the public meeting was to approve TransLink to coordinate a regional intermunicipal business license process for ride-hailing in our region. And this is quite important because, as Councillor Cameron reported at the last meeting, if there's a patchwork of business licenses and fees, this obviously makes it very unwieldy for the various ride-hailing companies to operate. They're going to be going from New Westminster to Burnaby, and they have to have different licenses, and there's different rules, etc. And as Councillor Cameron also mentioned, that in the United States and other jurisdictions where the local governments made it unwieldy and a patchwork, the state government has taken over, and then you have very little control and input over the process. So this is an opportunity for the TransLink Mayor's Council, along with TransLink, to, in short order, because I think we have until mid-January, which is very short for government agencies and organizations, to coordinate this intermunicipal business license program. So we approved that. We are moving forward. I think this is actually an opportunity also for TransLink, or the Mayor's Council and TransLink, which are asking for some changes to the TransLink governance model to have more control over transportation in the region. This is an opportunity to prove that the municipalities can work together, the mayors can work together, and that the province could give more power to local governments to control their destiny in that area. So that was a good outcome, and we'll stay apprised of how they make out. The other thing I attended on Thursday was we are a member, along with the Squamish Nation and the City of North Vancouver on an initiative started by the City of Vancouver called the Balanced Housing Lab. And the main purpose of the Balanced Housing Lab is to bring together partners to develop new solutions to our complex problems and critical problems of housing unaffordability, basically. While the market is responding to demand with new housing, market housing in any form is now out of reach for many, including working individuals and families. And as you know, the rental vacancy rate continues to be at a historic low. So this is happening fast, it's happening at a fundamental level, and we are coming together. And a lab is actually quite an interesting format. It's and I'll just read from the material. Social innovation labs are sometimes referred to as solution labs or design labs, change labs. These bring people together across sectors and backgrounds, and there's a 30-person advisory committee that is working on, or is actually the lab, to develop and test solutions to society's complex challenges. And what the bottom line is what this first meeting, and there's going to be 4 meetings, I believe. The first meeting, which was to define the challenge and figure out the prototypes that they want to, the opportunities they want to explore, and I remember them off the top of my head. The first was partnerships with Indigenous partners and non-Indigenous partners around housing. The second one, which is particularly interesting, is around engagement models and looking at even alternatives to public hearings, for example, that are much more conducive to collaboration, listening, a lot of things. So I'm quite excited about that. And so they're developing 3 prototypes, and then the final is just flexible housing models. So the idea is these prototypes are developed, and then the participants can test them in their municipalities. So this is going to be done in fairly, the meetings are coming up. It's going to be done in fairly short order, January 29th, February 26th, and the recommendations around March 23rd for the 3 prototypes. So 2 areas that I know the community is very interested in, transportation and housing, and I think a very good opportunity to collaborate with our partners across the region. All right, any other reports? No? Okay, so then we'll get a motion to receive the reports, and that's... He didn't come up on my...
No.
Still on.
Well, I will move to receive those for information.
Yes, maybe that's why. All right, can I get a seconder? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We do have a number of speakers signed up for the public question period. And Ms. Jones, I do apologize. I didn't get the sheet until after we'd passed that item, but you can still, I'll call you out. Maybe since we overlooked you, I'll get you to come up first.
Madam Mayor, just by point of procedural clarity, people are not entitled to speak to bylaws in the bylaws section
Oh,
of the
okay.
procedure bylaw, so that's
Okay.
why staff did not bring that to your
All right,
attention.
so, okay, so they can make general comments now, though she could make a general comment.
Madam Mayor, that's correct. If Ms. Jones wishes to make general comments, the only caution I would note is that the other three bylaws were the subject of a public hearing and have not yet been given final disposition. So as
Okay.
long as Ms. Jones's comments are only regarding the proposed development procedures or noise control bylaw amendments, then it's fine. But if it's about the Rogers Creek areas 5 and 6 generally, then council cannot receive any new information.
Okay, thank you for that
Thank you.
clarification. Ms. Jones, did you still wish to speak?
Not a problem. Madam Mayor, through you to Ms. Jones, as the public hearing regarding Rogers Creek areas 5 and 6 have closed, you're not able to speak to the proposed phase development agreement, official community plan, or rezoning bylaws. If you want to speak specifically to the noise control bylaw or the development procedures bylaw that were the subject of council's vote this evening, then you could do so. But you just have to limit your comments very narrowly. Thank you.
Are you good then? You're not going to speak? All right, okay. Would you like to come and speak now? And then the next person is Kathleen Staples.
So correct me if I go off on a tangent that's inappropriate. And I noticed online, not telling my address, last time I spoke, 5095 Keith Road, West Van. So in particular, what is concerning to me, and I think I'm able to speak to this, is the extension of work hours in relation. I have a concern about 6:30 in the morning till I think it's 7:30 p.m. And I would very much appreciate being advised what kind of work is deemed appropriate to be kind of thrusting upon the wildlife that currently lives above those areas where this noise bylaw is being extended or made available to work. And I think the excuse or the reason for that is congestion of traffic coming to the North Shore. But I would like to suggest that it is more important to respect the wildlife that is currently living there. And I don't know if there's going to be noise and, at 5:30, 6 p.m. when the wildlife would be settling in for the night, and if there's continuing light and sound that's inappropriate for those animals and wild bird life that live in that fringe area of forestry that is going to be cut into. I think it would be only appropriate to have enough sound during daylight hours and let the animals gradually move back from where that development is going to be moving into the forest area, what has been forest. I know it's not old growth forest, but it is what we have. It's second growth, and it's significant. A lot of the trees are 100, 150 years old, and they provide significant habitat to a lot of animals that are there. And I would suggest that that's more important than whatever congestion could maybe otherwise be remediated by maybe some of the workers carpooling at some distance wherever there is the main traffic congestion, which probably is not necessarily even Second Narrows Bridge, but farther east than that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next speaker is Kathleen Staples. And then after that is Wing Wing Fung.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. I know that you've all heard from me this week and are aware of what I'm after, which is to make Council and the group aware of 1143 Airmont Drive, the famous Ron Tom house, that now has a demolition clause on it for January 16th, as I understand, since I haven't been able to hear back from Jim Bailey and his office on which actual day the halt expires. So we, a group of us, are here tonight to speak to that, and that we have organized quite nicely, have a petition at change.org. It's already had over 100 members sign since 3 o'clock this afternoon. We have a GoFundMe campaign. We're interested to speak to the current owner of the property and work something out, of course, first. But second, we would hope that the Mayor and Council would see it as an important part of the West Vancouver, our unique culture, to protect. So if we could work together in the new year, we only have until the 16th for this to actually happen. We have people that are interested and have signed checks and are ready to buy the property. And if there's anything that we can do to help, we are interested to stop the demolition of the house, which, as I understand from your meeting tonight, you're looking for greening, you're looking for affordable housing, The person who owns the house has applied for a 27,000 square foot house for one person to go on that property. Well, that's obscene. So I hope that you can all help me see that way. And if there's anything that we can do to help you make the decisions that have to be made to protect some of these most important national treasures. This house won the most important architectural house award in 1964. It is an absolute treasure. We could certainly commercialize a group of these houses into something as they have in California or in New York or in Venice, where people are flocking to see these important cultural assets. And I would hope that we're going to be able to see the creativity forward to be able to do that. All right, and thank you. And I'm at 3054 Marine Drive with Binning Heritage Society. Thank you for the time tonight, and thank you all for taking my calls when I made them this week.
Thank you for coming. Okay, Wing Wing Fung.
Hi, Councillor. I'm also here to discuss the same house, the 1143 Airmount Drive. I'm not with the Binding Group Association, but to me, I just wanted to raise awareness that that house is designed by one of the founding fathers of West Coast mid-century modernism. And, West Vancouver itself doesn't really have a lot of identity. And I find that West Coast modernism is something that really is culturally significant to what we have left in West Vancouver. And the shaping and designing, the visions of people who were participated in the creation of West Vancouver is seen in these West Coast modern homes. Like the Ron Tom house, for instance, has these floor-to-ceiling windows, large overhangs, and is just designed that is just so forward for its time, and it's so innovative. And I think that we have so many of these remaining homes in West Vancouver, but we don't do anything to try to really preserve them. And I think that something should be done, because so many other cities are doing things and raising awareness to it. And if people knew the significance of these homes when they're purchasing them, for instance, they would kind of value their houses in a different way as well. For instance, like I know a lot of people, like if they see a house designed by Ron Tom, like, they don't know who Ron Tom is. They're not aware. But if there was more of awareness of this, maybe people could do something else. And for instance, this Ron Tom house, I've seen it been on and off the market several of times in the past 10 years, and empty a lot of it during most of this time. And could there be alternatives where the mayor and the council can come with agreements to work with the homeowners to incentivize them to keep these homes while accommodating to their needs, or kind of working on creating co-housing so more people could even appreciate these homes? But yeah, when my appreciation for West Vancouver really does stem from the architecture we have here. And I'm very proud to be living in a place with such beautiful architecture. And I think such design, especially in these Arthur Erickson Ron Tom homes, when these were designed with the intent of creativity, of design, and you can't really find that in a lot of the architecture now. So I really hope you guys do find a way to come to an agreement. Thank you.
Well, we're working on it. Thank you very much. Okay, Kelly Lone and then Ann Eady.
Is the overhead working again? I know at one time that had stopped. That'd be helpful. Thank you. Okay. Ready now? Okay, okay. All right, very good then. Well, good evening.
Good evening.
Madam Mayor and councillors. Probably know my name's Kelly Lone, and I live at 4346 Ross Crescent. I realize that the 4358 agenda item is not on the agenda, but will be next year. And I won't be here at the meeting next year, unfortunately, so I wanted to at least attend this evening and share some of the concerns I have with this project. And by the way, it isn't so much the FCL, quite frankly. It's the, if I can say, the the end of the day, it's the execution and the cover that's being used to put through 10 variances, particularly those that are on the waterfront side of the property. They're looking at proposing to have what is going to be a landfill of 11 feet, raising the natural grade 11 feet over what is there now and what indeed is over what is us. And you can see this is where we are right now, and this is where we will be after they go through with this. And all of this is being done in order to accommodate what is to be an outdoor room, mostly. And this outdoor room is going to have a permanent roof structure on it. It's going to have barbecue decks, a pool deck, pool, and through all this whole process, this podium that is going to be supporting this is contrary to the flood hazard area land user management guidelines of January 2018. And those guidelines say that there's not to be any raising of the natural grade of the property over the natural grade of the adjoining properties. It also says that there's not supposed to be any landfill within 15 meters of the property boundary. And clearly, this is what is happening here. And the effect of this proposal is one which is going to be very offensive to the neighbors and to us. And of course, our concern is this create a model for the other future houses that will be there. We do have 60 some odd waterfront, or I should say non-waterfront, and almost 40 waterfront homes that are going to be impacted potentially by these kind of properties. And the solution is very simple. It's one whereby you could end up having, as we have in so many houses in West Vancouver, you walk up to the main floor, there's a sun deck in the back, and you have a situation where you could have that FCL of 5.9 or whatever it may be. And then there is the insurance issue. This acts like a bow of a ship. This is going to end up diverting the water into the adjoining properties, knowingly, and you've been warned of that. And I'd like to say one more thing. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, thank you.
And I hope you enjoy your break.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for hearing me tonight.
You're welcome. And last speaker, Ann Eady.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and councillors. Like the previous speaker, Kelly, I have come along tonight to say just one or two words on the 4358 Ross Crescent DVP. I also will not be here in January, and I know it has taken so much of your time, energy, and effort over the past few months trying to delve into what is a good solution. To say that it has been absolutely devastating for many of the homeowners on Ross Crescent would certainly be an understatement. I cannot imagine how stressful it must be to think that your home and possibly your way of life is under total threat. I like to think about things, and I think about the very first time I spoke on this, and about development variance permits and the guidelines that are really attached to them and have been written by, I assume, the planning department. They are very clear in things that should and should not be done. I also like to read the sentence, too, when discussing variances, that the approval of particular variance may involve compromise by the applicant and in other aspects of zoning bylaw regulations, site developments in order to mitigate potential impacts on the neighbors or character of the surrounding area. I also looked up the word variance in the dictionary today. This was interesting. It defined, good old Webster, a license to do something contrary to the usual rule, i.e. zoning. The synonyms that were listed I thought were very telling. Discord, strife, dissension. Are these words we want to describe
our community and how things are tackled. I cannot see why an applicant would willingly put a lot of money into plans for a building that is filled with variances unless they had very good counsel that those variances might be granted. I wonder why, and the basis of the guidelines to the development variance permits. I also caution too and wonder how we can look at such a very increased flood control level when the district staff themselves have not put years of planning into this. It has been on the radar for a very long time. Surely this is far more of an issue than can be settled by a development variance permit. I wish you all good luck with your decision. I have one more request of you. Possibly if you're trying to wear off that turkey dinner over the holidays, come and walk along Ross Crescent or Irwin, maybe even Evergreen. Look not only at the waterfront homes, but look at the homes on the northern side of those streets and imagine how they too feel at the thought of being inundated with water, because water will always find its lowest level.
Thank you.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. All right, so I don't see any more speakers, and I will ask Councillor Lambert.
Do I get to close the meeting? How
You
about
do.
that? Okay, Madam Mayor?
I wrote down Lambert there.
Okay, well, it's okay, I'll do it. So I recommend that,
Go ahead.
recommend that the December 16th, 2019 council meeting be adjourned.
All in favor? Opposed, carried. We're going to see you guys on Wednesday. We're back, so I won't bid you Merry Christmas quite
Not
yet.
yet.